In the midst of a tense courtroom battle, a young black boy, Nathaniel, interrupts the proceedings with a shocking revelation: "I'm your son." His words send shockwaves through the room, leaving Judge Gregory Harrison, a man of power and principle, grappling with the truth that could shatter his reputation and his carefully constructed life. Who is Nathaniel, and what hidden truths will this confrontation reveal? Subscribe to the channel and follow along to see how this powerful story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The courtroom was alive with the murmur of voices, lawyers flipping through files, court clerks bustling back and forth, and an audience seated in tense anticipation. Judge Gregory Harrison, a man who seemed to carry the weight of the law on his well-tailored shoulders, sat high above the room. His gavel rested to the side, pristine and unused for now. The overhead lighting gleamed against his salt and pepper hair, casting his stern profile into sharper relief. Gregory prided himself on his impartiality. For nearly 2 decades, he'd built a reputation as a no-nonsense adjudicator, someone who rarely let emotions bleed into his rulings. But as he prepared to oversee yet another contentious custody battle, the thought of the case being splashed across tomorrow's headlines filled him with a familiar dread. The litigants, a young black mother and her estranged husband, argued not just over their child but over what each believed to be an inherent system of bias within Gregory's court. He dismissed the notion with an internal scoff, confident in his objectivity. As the attorneys settled in, Gregory raised a hand. The quiet in the room deepened into stillness. His voice, commanding but measured, broke through. "Counselors, are we ready to proceed?" he asked, his tone making it clear that he would not tolerate theatrics. The attorneys nodded in turn, and Gregory began to address the room. "The purpose of this hearing is to determine custody arrangements that are in the best interests of the minor child, Miss Olivia Carter. I will not entertain extraneous arguments about systemic grievances or personal vendettas. Let us stick to the facts." The mother, a petite woman in her early 30s, leaned forward nervously, clutching the arm of her chair. Her estranged husband, a man with a rigid posture and cold expression, smirked faintly as though already anticipating victory. The first witness was called, and the humdrum of legal back and forth resumed. It was all routine for Gregory until a movement from the courtroom's rear caught his attention. A boy, no older than 9, stepped forward. His skinny frame, clad in a slightly oversized plaid shirt and jeans, seemed out of place amidst the suited lawyers and sharply dressed litigants. For a moment, Gregory thought the boy had wandered in by mistake. But then, the boy spoke, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the proceedings like a sudden crack of thunder. "Judge Harrison," the boy said, his wide brown eyes locking onto Gregory's, "I need to talk to you." The room collectively froze. Heads turned, whispers broke out, and even the court stenographer paused mid-typing. Gregory squinted at the boy, irritation and confusion bubbling beneath his composed exterior. "Son," Gregory said, his tone clipped, "this is a court of law. You can't interrupt." "I'm your son," the boy interrupted, louder this time. The murmurs became gasps. Gregory's eyes narrowed, his brow furrowing deeply. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He felt the oxygen in the room shift, as if everyone was now holding their breath, waiting for his reaction. The bailiff stepped forward cautiously. "Your Honor, should I?" "No," Gregory said sharply, raising a hand. "Let him speak." The boy's small hands trembled slightly, but he didn't waver. "My name is Nathaniel Carter," he began, his voice gaining strength. "My mom, her name was Mia. She told me before she passed away. You're my dad." The judge's face drained of color. The name, Mia, hit him like a sledgehammer. He hadn't heard it in over a decade, but it was a name etched into the back of his mind like a scar. "Mia Carter," Gregory whispered, barely audible. The boy nodded, his eyes misting over. He turned and gestured to the back of the room, where a woman stood clutching a worn leather bag against her chest. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen her fair share of struggles. "That's my Aunt Lena," Nathaniel said. "She's been taking care of me since Mom passed." The woman stepped forward hesitantly, her presence radiating unease. "Your Honor," Lena began, her voice strained. I didn't want it to come out like this. but Nathaniel insisted on being here today. This is ridiculous, barked the opposing counsel, rising from his seat. This child and his aunt have no bearing on this case. I request they be removed from the courtroom at once. Gregory shot the lawyer a warning glare that silenced him immediately. Turning back to the boy and his aunt, he drew a deep breath. Mrs. Carter, he said, addressing the aunt, do you have proof of this claim? Lena hesitated, her hands fumbling with the bag she carried. Mia left letters, she said finally. They explain everything. I tried to contact you years ago, but you... Enough, Gregory said, cutting her off. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the composure he fought so hard to maintain. Approach the bench. Lena stepped forward, her steps deliberate but unsteady. She placed a stack of weathered envelopes on the bench. Gregory stared at them, his hands unwilling to move, as if touching them would confirm a reality he wasn't ready to face. The silence grew oppressive until one of the attorneys spoke up. Your Honor, I must object. This is highly inappropriate. Overruled, Gregory said, his voice sharp. He turned his attention back to the boy. Nathaniel, is it? The boy nodded. Gregory's lips parted as if to ask a question, but he stopped. He couldn't bring himself to ask for details, not yet. Instead, he picked up the top envelope. The faint scent of lavender, so familiar it stung, wafted up as he unfolded the paper inside. Gregory, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you've finally been confronted with the truth I couldn't bring myself to tell you all those years ago. His grip on the paper tightened, the edges crumpling slightly under his fingers. Your Honor, Lena's voice jolted him from his trance. What? What do we do now? Gregory exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. We take a recess, he said abruptly, his gavel striking the bench harder than intended. The sound echoed ominously, signaling both the end of the session and the beginning of a storm he could no longer contain. As he rose, his robe swaying with the movement, his gaze lingered on Nathaniel. The boy's expression was a mixture of hope and fear, an unspoken plea for acknowledgement. Gregory didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he turned and retreated to his chambers, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. Inside, he slumped into his chair, the letter still clutched in his hand. The noise from the courtroom seeped through the walls, voices of confusion, disbelief, and curiosity. For the first time in years, Gregory felt something foreign. Not control or authority, but vulnerability. And as he stared at the letter, the truth of his past began to unravel before him like threads pulled loose from a tightly woven fabric. Inside his chambers, Judge Gregory Harrison sat motionless, the air around him thick with disbelief. The courtroom noise had died down, but echoes of Nathaniel's words, "I'm your son," still reverberated in his mind. His fingers trembled as they gripped the edges of Mia's letter, its soft, worn paper creased and stained from years of handling. He had seen countless dramatic moments in his courtroom, outbursts from defendants, heartfelt testimonies from witnesses, and emotional pleas from parents desperate to keep their children. But this was unprecedented. It wasn't a case for the court, it was personal. Far too personal. How could this happen? He thought, his rational mind struggling to comprehend the chaos that had erupted in mere minutes. He had spent decades meticulously separating his personal life from his professional duties. Now, his child, if Nathaniel's words were true, had shattered that barrier with a single sentence. Gregory leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, trying to steady his breathing. The faint aroma of lavender still lingered from Mia's letter, dragging his thoughts back to a time he had spent years trying to bury. The knock at his door was hesitant, almost apologetic. Judge Harrison, the voice of his clerk, Angela, called softly. The court is waiting for your instructions. Do you want me to reconvene the hearing? Gregory rubbed his temples, taking a moment before responding. No, extend the recess. Indefinitely if necessary. Yes, Your Honor, Angela replied, her tone tinged with concern. And Judge, the boy's aunt is still outside. She's asking to speak with you privately. Gregory's hand froze mid-motion. He hadn't considered that. Facing Nathaniel in open court had been one thing, an unexpected, unavoidable confrontation. But meeting with the aunt, hearing what she might have to say about Mia and this boy, that required deliberate action, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet refusing wasn't an option, not after the claim Nathaniel had made. Gregory took a deep breath and forced himself to his feet. "Send her in," he said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. Lena Carter stepped into the chambers with an air of caution. She was a woman who had learned to carry herself with quiet resilience, her every movement deliberate and measured. In her eyes, Gregory saw years of hardship, but also determination. "Judge Harrison," she said, her voice low and respectful. "Thank you for seeing me." Gregory gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Lena hesitated for a moment before taking the seat across from him. She set her leather bag on her lap, her fingers toying with the worn straps. Gregory could sense her discomfort, but also her resolve to face this moment head-on. What is this about?" Gregory began, his voice faltering slightly. "Why now? Why bring this to my courtroom?" Lena's expression tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I didn't want to," she admitted. "I've been raising Nathaniel since Mia passed away 2 years ago. She left behind letters, photos, proof of what she always wanted to tell you but never did." Her words were a punch to Gregory's gut. 2 years? He felt a pang of guilt, thinking of the boy who had been without a mother for that long. And he, the supposed father, had been none the wiser. "She talked about you often," Lena continued. "Not in a way that made me think you were a bad man, but she said you were scared of what people would think, scared of what being with her, a black woman, would do to your career." Gregory's jaw clenched. He wanted to deny it, to push back against Lena's assessment. But the truth was undeniable, searing like a hot iron pressed against his conscience. He had ended things with Mia for precisely those reasons, justifying it to himself as a practical decision, a necessity to preserve the life he was building. "I didn't know," Gregory said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "She never told me." "She wanted to," Lena said, her voice softening. "But by the time she worked up the courage, you had already moved on. You were married, a rising star in the legal world. She didn't want to disrupt your life." Gregory's gaze dropped to his desk, his hands clasped tightly together. "And Nathaniel? Did she ever tell him about me?" "Not until the end," Lena replied. "She didn't want him to grow up feeling abandoned. But when she got sick and knew her time was running out, she told him the truth. That you were his father. She wanted him to know where he came from." The weight of her words settled over Gregory like a heavy blanket. He thought of Nathaniel standing in the courtroom, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing surroundings, yet speaking with a courage that Gregory himself had lacked all those years ago. "I don't know what to do," Gregory admitted, his voice breaking. "This is beyond anything I've ever faced." Lena leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Do what Mia couldn't. Be there for him. He's just a boy, Judge Harrison. He's looking for a connection, for answers. You can give him that." Gregory nodded slowly, though his mind remained clouded with uncertainty. Hours later, when the courthouse had emptied and the sun was setting, Gregory sat alone in his chambers. The stack of letters from Mia lay untouched on his desk, each one holding fragments of a story he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. But the image of Nathaniel lingered. The boy's eyes, so much like Mia's kashis, seemed to follow him, urging him forward. Gregory reached for the top letter, unfolding it with care. "Dear Gregory, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I hope you're not angry with me for keeping Nathaniel a secret for so long. It was never about punishment or spite. I made a choice to protect him, to let him grow up without feeling like a burden in your life. But now he needs you. He's smart, Gregory. He's kind. He has your stubbornness, your drive to do what's right, even when it's hard. I see so much of you in him, and it scares me, because I know how hard the world can be on a boy like him. A boy with a father who's too scared to stand by him. Don't let that fear win, Gregory. Not again. Mia." Gregory's hands shook as he finished reading. His chest tightened with a mixture of grief and determination. Mia's words felt like a challenge, a call to action he couldn't ignore. The next morning, when Nathaniel and Lena arrived at the courthouse, they found Gregory waiting for them at the front steps. He stood tall, his black robe absent, replaced by a simple gray suit that made him seem less like an imposing figure of authority and more like an ordinary man. "Nathaniel," Gregory said, his voice steady but warm. The boy looked up at him, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Yes, sir." Gregory knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level. "I think we need to talk. Properly this time." Nathaniel hesitated, glancing at his aunt, who gave him an encouraging nod. Slowly, the boy stepped closer to Gregory, his small hand reaching out tentatively. Gregory took it, gripping it gently but firmly. In that moment, he felt something shift, an unspoken promise forming between them. He didn't know what the future held or how he would navigate the complications ahead. But one thing was clear: he wouldn't turn away this time. "Let's start with lunch," Gregory said, offering a faint smile. "I want to get to know you." Nathaniel's eyes brightened, and for the first time since their encounter in the courtroom, he smiled back. The diner Gregory chose for lunch was a modest, unassuming place nestled between an old bookstore and a corner pharmacy. Its checkered floor, vinyl booths, and the smell of sizzling bacon offered a stark contrast to the sterile solemnity of the courtroom. It wasn't the kind of place Gregory frequented, but something about its simplicity seemed appropriate for the moment. He wanted to set a tone not as a judge, not even as a man of stature, but as someone willing to connect on equal ground. Nathaniel sat across from him, his small hands folded on the table, his eyes flicking nervously between the laminated menu and Gregory. The boy seemed both curious and wary, as if unsure whether this was a moment of reconciliation or just another trial he had to endure. Gregory offered a smile, though it felt stiff, unfamiliar. "Order whatever you want," he said, sliding the menu closer to Nathaniel. "My treat." The boy hesitated. "Are you sure?" His voice was small, uncertain, but laced with a hint of excitement. "Positive," Gregory said firmly, glad to see the boy's face brighten ever so slightly. As Nathaniel scanned the menu, Gregory found himself studying him. The boy's features were a mix of his own and Mia's, a subtle combination that made it impossible to deny the connection. His dark brown eyes carried a depth beyond his years, as if life had forced him to grow up faster than he should have. "Do you like pancakes?" Nathaniel asked suddenly, breaking Gregory's train of thought. Gregory chuckled softly. "Pancakes are always a good choice." Nathaniel nodded and waved shyly at the waitress, who took their orders with a warm smile. As she walked away, silence fell between them again, though it wasn't uncomfortable. Gregory used the moment to gather his thoughts, deciding how much of the truth he was ready to confront, not just for Nathaniel's sake, but for his own. Once the food arrived, Nathaniel attacked his pancakes with enthusiasm, the syrup forming a sticky halo around his small plate. Gregory couldn't help but smile at the sight. So Gregory began cautiously. "It was the first time he'd seen Nathaniel let his guard down the past couple of years, even if just a little. How's that been?" Nathaniel shrugged, swallowing a mouthful of pancake. "It's okay. Aunt Lena's nice, and she takes care of me. But it's not the same." "The same as what?" Gregory prompted gently. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to his plate. He poked at a piece of pancake with his fork, his voice quieter now, "as having a mom. Or a dad." The words landed heavily between them, like a truth Gregory wasn't sure how to respond to. He took a sip of his coffee, using the pause to steady himself. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't know about you, Nathaniel. If I had, things might have been different." Nathaniel looked up, his expression unreadable. "You didn't know?" he echoed, as though testing the validity of the statement. Gregory nodded. "That's right. Your mom, Mia, she never told me." The mention of her name seemed to bring a flicker of warmth to Nathaniel's eyes. "She talked about you sometimes," he said. "She said you were smart, that you wanted to do big things." Gregory's throat tightened. "She did." "Yeah," Nathaniel said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "She said you were a lawyer when she met you, that you always wore nice suits and had lots of books." Gregory chuckled softly, though the sound was tinged with sadness. She wasn't wrong. The boy tilted his head curiously. "Why didn't you stay with her? If you liked her, I mean." The question hit Gregory like a punch to the gut. He set his coffee cup down carefully, his hands gripping the edges of the table for support. He had prepared himself for tough conversations, but hearing the question framed so innocently by a child made it all the more difficult. "It's complicated," Gregory said carefully. Your mom and I were very different people, and back then I let things like that matter too much." Nathaniel frowned. "Like what?" Gregory hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He didn't want to burden Nathaniel with the harsh realities of racism, systemic pressure, or the prejudices he had internalized in his younger years. But he also knew he owed the boy some form of honesty. "Like what people might think," Gregory said finally. "I was scared of how it might affect my career, my family, even her. I thought I was doing the right thing by stepping away." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly, his young mind processing the explanation. "You were scared of being my dad." The words stung more than Gregory expected. "No," he said quickly, leaning forward. "Not of being your dad. I didn't even know about you back then. I was scared of being the kind of person who couldn't handle the challenges that came with loving your mom." Nathaniel stared at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Mom used to say everyone makes mistakes," he said quietly, "but she also said it's what you do after that matters." Gregory felt his chest tighten, the boy's words cutting through him with surprising clarity. Mia had been right, of course. And now, as he sat across from Nathaniel, he realized this was his chance, perhaps his only chance to do something that mattered. After they finished their meal, Gregory drove Nathaniel and Lena back to their modest apartment. The neighborhood was a far cry from the affluent suburb Gregory called home. Small, weathered buildings with peeling paint and overgrown lawns lined the street. Yet there was a certain resilience about the place, a sense of community evident in the children playing basketball on a cracked court and the neighbors chatting on porches. Nathaniel hopped out of the car eagerly, waving to a friend across the street. Lena lingered for a moment, turning to Gregory with a guarded expression. "Thank you," she said, "for taking the time with him." Gregory nodded. "It was the least I could do." Lena hesitated, then added, "He's been through a lot since Mia passed. I don't know what you're planning, but don't make promises you can't keep. He's a good kid, but he's had enough heartbreak." Gregory's jaw tightened. "I understand." Lena nodded, then followed Nathaniel inside, leaving Gregory alone in his car. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the apartment building, before finally driving away. That night, Gregory returned to his study, the stack of Mia's letters still sitting on his desk. He picked up another one, unfolding it carefully. Her handwriting, elegant and fluid, filled the page. "Gregory, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do. By now, Nathaniel has probably told you everything. I want you to know he's not angry at you. He's a good boy full of love and forgiveness. But he needs something I can't give him anymore. He needs you. Please, don't let your fear hold you back again. Be the father he deserves." Gregory folded the letter and set it aside, his chest heaving with emotion. Mia's words lingered in his mind as he stared out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He thought of Nathaniel, his shy smile, his hopeful eyes, his quiet determination. For the first time in years, Gregory felt something stir deep within him. A purpose, a chance to right a wrong he had lived with for far too long. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found a familiar name. "Angela," he said when his clerk answered. "I need you to schedule a meeting with the family court mediator tomorrow. There's something I need to revisit." As he hung up, Gregory leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decision settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't run from it anymore. The courthouse was quieter than usual the following morning, its polished floors reflecting Gregory's deliberate steps. Angela, his clerk, had scheduled the meeting Gregory requested, but as he made his way to the mediation room, a storm of emotions churned beneath his calm exterior. This wasn't just another legal proceeding, this was about addressing a personal failure that had haunted him for years, a reckoning with his past that could reshape his future. The mediator's office was modest, with walls painted in a soothing cream color and shelves stacked with law books and binders. Lena and Nathaniel were already there when Gregory arrived, seated at a small round table. Lena looked composed but wary, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. Nathaniel sat beside her, his legs swinging beneath his chair, as he gazed at Gregory with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. "Good morning," Gregory said, his voice steady but softer than usual. He offered a brief nod to the mediator, a middle-aged woman named Barbara who had presided over countless family cases. Judge Harrison Barbara greeted him with a small smile. "Thank you for coming. Shall we begin?" Gregory nodded and took his seat, folding his hands on the table. He glanced at Nathaniel, who quickly looked away, focusing intently on a notepad in front of him. Barbara began with her usual preamble, explaining the purpose of the meeting and the importance of confidentiality. But Gregory barely heard her words, his mind occupied by the boy sitting across from him. When Barbara finished, she turned to Gregory with a probing gaze. "Judge Harrison," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "can you tell us what you hope to accomplish today?" Gregory hesitated, searching for the right words. I want to make things right," he said finally. "For Nathaniel. For all of us." Barbara nodded, then looked at Lena. "And you, M.S. Carter." Lena straightened in her chair, her expression guarded. "I just want what's best for Nathaniel," she said. "I've been trying to protect him, but if Judge Harrison is serious about being in his life, then we need to figure out what that looks like." Nathaniel's head snapped up at Lena's words, his wide eyes flickering with hope. He glanced at Gregory, as if daring to believe in the possibility of something more. Barbara turned to Nathaniel with a warm smile. "Nathaniel, is there anything you'd like to say? You don't have to if you're not comfortable, but this meeting is for you." Nathaniel hesitated, his small fingers tracing patterns on the edge of the table. Finally, he looked up, his voice soft but steady. "I just want to know if he's going to stay," he said, his gaze fixed on Gregory. "I don't want him to say he's my dad and then leave again." The room fell silent. Gregory's chest tightened, the boy's words cutting straight to the heart of his guilt. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Nathaniel," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I wasn't there before, but I want to be here now. For you." Nathaniel studied him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity in Gregory's eyes. "You promise?" he asked quietly. "I promise," Gregory said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes." Barbara cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "It's clear there's a lot to work through," she said. "But this is a good starting point. Judge Harrison, have you thought about what role you'd like to play in Nathaniel's life moving forward?" Gregory nodded, though the weight of the decision still loomed large. "I want to be involved," he said. "Not just as a figure in the background, but as a father. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to do the work." Lena frowned slightly, her protective instincts surfacing. "That's easy to say now," she said. "But being a father isn't just about showing up. It's about commitment, patience, and sacrifice. Are you ready for that?" "I am," Gregory said, meeting her gaze. "I know I can't change the past, but I can take responsibility for the future." Barbara nodded, taking notes. "That's a good start. We'll need to discuss specifics, visitation schedules, co-parenting arrangements, but for now, let's focus on building trust." Over the next few weeks, Gregory committed himself to the process. He attended every scheduled meeting with Nathaniel and Lena, gradually learning more about the boy's life. He listened as Nathaniel talked about school, his favorite books, and his dreams of becoming an astronaut. Each detail felt like a piece of a puzzle Gregory was only beginning to assemble. But it wasn't without challenges. Nathaniel's initial enthusiasm was often tempered by moments of hesitation, as if he were bracing himself for disappointment. Gregory understood why his absence had left a void, and trust wouldn't be built overnight. One afternoon, Gregory invited Nathaniel to spend the day with him at a local science museum. The boy's eyes lit up when Gregory mentioned the space exhibit, and for the first time, Gregory saw a glimpse of the carefree joy that every child deserved. As they wandered through the museum, Nathaniel peppered Gregory with questions about the planets and stars. "Did you ever want to go to space?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Gregory smiled. "I thought about it when I was your age," he admitted. "But I ended up choosing a different path." "Why?" Nathaniel asked. Gregory hesitated, considering his answer. "I guess I was drawn to solving problems here on Earth," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean you can't aim for the stars." Nathaniel grinned, his excitement contagious. I'm going to be the first kid to walk on Mars, he declared. I believe you will, Gregory said, ruffling the boy's hair. And when you do, I'll be cheering you on. Later that evening, as Gregory dropped Nathaniel off at Lena's apartment, the boy turned to him with a shy smile. Thanks for today, he said. It was fun. It was my pleasure, Gregory replied, his heart swelling at the boy's gratitude. We'll do it again soon. As Nathaniel disappeared inside, Gregory lingered for a moment, watching the light in the apartment flicker on. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond his career. He wasn't just a judge or a man trying to make amends, he was a father, and that realization filled him with both hope and determination. The warm hum of conversation filled the park as families enjoyed the lazy afternoon. Children ran through the grass, their laughter rising above the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Gregory watched from a distance, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Nathaniel stood a few paces away, his small figure silhouetted against the vibrant green backdrop of the playground. The boy clutched a basketball to his chest, his stance a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Come on, Judge Harrison, Lena said from beside him, her tone gently teasing. He's waiting. Gregory gave her a faint smile, adjusting his tie out of habit before loosening it again. Gregory, he corrected her. I think we're well past the formalities. Fair enough, Lena replied with a smirk. Now get out there. He's not going to wait forever. With a deep breath, Gregory stepped forward. Nathaniel spotted him and immediately straightened, gripping the ball a little tighter. Gregory could see the unease in the boy's posture, and he knew he had to tread carefully. This wasn't just a game, it was a test, one Gregory couldn't afford to fail. You ready? Gregory asked, stopping a few feet away. Nathaniel shrugged, his eyes darting to the ground. I guess. Gregory crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the boy's eye level. You know, I'm not exactly great at this. It's been years since I played basketball. You'll probably wipe the floor with me. Nathaniel's lips quirked upward, just enough to show he wasn't immune to Gregory's attempt at humor. You really think so? Absolutely, Gregory said with a smile. But I'm willing to give it a shot if you are. Nathaniel studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but I get to start. Deal. The game was less a competition and more a series of awkward, lopsided attempts at shooting the ball. Gregory's suit jacket, which he had stubbornly refused to leave in the car, became a casualty early on, flung over the back of a bench as he tried to keep up with Nathaniel's quick movements. The boy darted around him with ease, his laughter bubbling to the surface every time Gregory fumbled an easy pass or missed a shot. You're terrible, Nathaniel teased, dribbling the ball around Gregory with exaggerated flair. I never said I was good, Gregory replied, panting as he tried to block the boy's path. I'm a judge, not a basketball player. Nathaniel feigned left, then spun to the right, leaving Gregory stumbling as the boy made a perfect layup. Gotcha, Nathaniel exclaimed, throwing his arms into the air in victory. Gregory laughed, wiping the sweat from his brow. You've definitely got some skills. Nathaniel shrugged, but the pride in his expression was unmistakable. I practice a lot. At school, sometimes with the kids here. You're really good, Gregory said earnestly. Maybe one day you'll make the school team, or even play professionally. Nathaniel's grin faltered, and he glanced away. Maybe. I don't know. The shift in his mood was subtle but noticeable, and Gregory immediately picked up on it. He stepped closer, crouching again so their eyes were level. Hey, what's wrong? Nathaniel hesitated, the ball resting loosely between his hands. Sometimes. I don't think I can do stuff like that, he admitted quietly. Like big stuff. Gregory frowned. Why not? You're talented, smart, and hardworking. You can do anything you set your mind to. Nathaniel kicked at the ground, his shoulders slumping slightly. Mom used to say that too. But kids at school don't always think the same. They say stuff. What kind of stuff? Gregory pressed gently, though his jaw clenched in anticipation. Nathaniel's voice dropped to a whisper. That I'm not good enough. That I can't do things because I'm different. Gregory's chest tightened. He didn't need Nathaniel to explain further to understand the weight of those words. He had heard similar sentiments himself during his youth, thinly veiled behind polite language or outright hostility. The knowledge that his son was enduring the same prejudices filled him with a mix of anger and sorrow. Nathaniel, Gregory said firmly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Listen to me. People will always have opinions, but their words don't define you. What matters is what you think about yourself and what you choose to do with your life. Nathaniel looked up at him, his eyes wide and searching. But what if they're right? What if I can't? They're not right, Gregory interrupted, his voice steady but filled with conviction. You can. And I'll be here to remind you of that every step of the way. Nathaniel stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of Gregory's words. Finally, he nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Gregory smiled back, standing and ruffling the boy's hair. Good. Now let's see if I can score at least 1 point before you crush me completely. Nathaniel laughed, his earlier hesitation melting away. You're going to need a miracle for that. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the park in shades of orange and gold, Gregory and Nathaniel sat on a bench, sipping from water bottles. Lena watched from a distance, a soft smile on her lips as she observed their growing bond. You're not as bad as I thought you'd be, Nathaniel said, breaking the silence. Gregory raised an eyebrow. I'll take that as a compliment. Nathaniel grinned. You should. The easy banter between them felt like a break through a tentative step towards something resembling a relationship. Gregory knew there was still a long road ahead, filled with challenges and uncertainties. But for the first time, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. As they packed up to leave, Nathaniel turned to Gregory, his expression serious. Can we do this again? Like, next weekend? Gregory's heart swelled at the question, the boy's words carrying more weight than Nathaniel likely realized. Of course, Gregory said without hesitation. Whenever you want. Nathaniel nodded, his smile returning. Cool. Later that night, Gregory sat alone in his study, reflecting on the day, the laughter, the shared moments, and even the difficult conversations replayed in his mind like a reel of memories he didn't want to forget. He reached for the last of Mia's letters, the one he had avoided until now. Gregory. If you're reading this, it means you've started to know Nathaniel, really know him. And I hope you've seen what I've always known, that he's special. Not because of what he's been through, but because of who he is. I know you're scared. I was too. But don't let fear keep you from being the father he deserves. He needs you. And I think deep down you need him too. Tears blurred Gregory's vision as he folded the letter and set it aside. Mia's words felt like a balm, soothing the guilt and doubt that had plagued him for so long. She had believed in him, even when he hadn't believed in himself. And now, as he thought of Nathaniel's smile and the hope in his eyes, Gregory realized he had finally found what he had been missing, a purpose greater than himself. He rose from his chair and looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years, Gregory felt ready to face them. For Nathaniel, for Mia, and for the man he wanted to become. The courthouse steps were a sea of reporters, activists, and curious onlookers, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of questions, chants, and camera shutters. Gregory Harrison stood at the center of it all, his broad shoulders stiff and his jaw set with quiet determination. He had faced scrutiny before, critiques of his rulings, the occasional backlash from a high-profile case, but this was different. This was personal. Nathaniel's revelation had spread like wildfire. It started as whispers in the legal community, but quickly grew into a media storm, with every major outlet dissecting Gregory's private life. The news framed it as a scandal, a respected judge with a hidden past, now facing questions about his integrity and judgment. Protesters lined the streets outside the courthouse, their signs bearing slogans like "Justice for all," not just some, and "Bias has no place in the courtroom." Gregory had ignored it for as long as he could, focusing on Nathaniel and his commitment to building their relationship. But the noise refused to die down. His superiors had called for a review of his past rulings, citing concerns about possible bias. The media painted him as emblematic of a justice system plagued by systemic inequities. Even his colleagues, many of whom he had considered friends, began to keep their distance, their support now tinged with hesitation. Now, as he stepped to the podium set up on the courthouse steps, the weight of it all pressed down on him. The crowd quieted slightly, their attention laser-focused on the man they had come to judge. "Good morning," Gregory began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. He gripped the edges of the podium, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I've called this press conference to address the recent attention surrounding my personal life and my work as a judge." The cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every flicker of emotion on his face. Gregory took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "First, I want to acknowledge the concerns that have been raised. As a judge, my role is to ensure fairness and impartiality in every case that comes before me. It is a role I take seriously, and one I have dedicated my career to upholding." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. However, Gregory continued, his voice growing firmer, "I am not immune to reflection or accountability. The revelations about my past, about my son Nathaniel, have forced me to confront truths about myself that I can no longer ignore. I made choices years ago that I believed were justified at the time. But I now see the ways in which those choices were influenced by fear, privilege, and societal pressures." The murmurs grew louder and Gregory paused, letting his words sink in. "I recognize that my past actions and even some of my rulings may not have fully accounted for the systemic inequities that many in our community face. I cannot change those decisions, but I can commit to doing better moving forward." The protesters at the edges of the crowd began chanting again, their voices a stark reminder of the stakes. Gregory raised a hand, signaling for calm. "To those who have questioned my ability to serve impartially, I hear you," said. "And to those who have been hurt by biases within the justice system, I see you. I am committed to not only examining my own work, but also to advocating for systemic reforms that ensure equity and fairness for all." As Gregory stepped away from the podium, the questions came rapid fire. "Judge Harrison, do you believe you can still serve effectively? What about your son's claims of abandonment? Are you stepping down from the bench?" Gregory paused, turning back to the reporters. "I will continue to serve as long as I am able, but I welcome the review of my past rulings. If there is one thing I hope to show, it's that accountability and growth are possible for individuals and institutions alike." With that, he descended the steps, the crowd parting to let him through. Lena and Nathaniel waited at the edge of the chaos, their presence grounding him amidst the noise. Nathaniel clutched Gregory's hand tightly, his small fingers a lifeline. "Was that scary?" Nathaniel asked, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Very," Gregory admitted with a small smile. "But some things are worth being scared for." The days that followed were a whirlwind of scrutiny and self-reflection. Gregory met with a team of mediators and legal scholars, combing through his past rulings to identify any patterns of bias. The process was grueling, each case reopening questions he had thought long settled. Some rulings held firm under the scrutiny, while others revealed subtle but undeniable prejudices. One case in particular haunted him, a custody battle from years ago involving a young black mother who had lost her children to the state. At the time, Gregory had ruled in favor of the state, citing concerns about stability. But as he reviewed the transcripts and the evidence, he realized how heavily his decision had been influenced by implicit biases and assumptions about the mother's ability to parent. Gregory brought the case to his superiors, recommending a full review. It was a painful admission, but he knew it was necessary. He couldn't ask others to trust the system if he wasn't willing to hold himself accountable. Amid the professional upheaval, Gregory found solace in his growing relationship with Nathaniel. The boy's presence reminded him of why he was fighting so hard to change, not just for the system, but for the world his son would grow up in. One evening, Gregory and Nathaniel sat together in Gregory's living room, a stack of books spread out on the coffee table. Nathaniel had been assigned a school project on historical figures, and Gregory was helping him choose a subject. "What about Frederick Douglass?" Gregory suggested, holding up a biography. Nathaniel wrinkled his nose. "He's cool, but everyone does him. I want someone different." Gregory chuckled. "Fair enough. How about Claudette Colvin? She was one of the first people to resist segregation on buses before Rosa Parks even. Nathaniel's eyes lit up. Really? Why don't we learn about her as much? Sometimes, Gregory said thoughtfully, people who make big changes don't get the recognition they deserve, but that doesn't make their work any less important. Nathaniel nodded, his fingers tracing the cover of the book. She sounds awesome. I think I'll do my project on her. As they settled into a comfortable silence, Gregory felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The fight for redemption, both personal and professional, was far from over, but moments like this reminded him why it was worth it. By the time the review of Gregory's rulings was complete, the findings were mixed. Some decisions were upheld as sound and impartial, while others revealed areas where Gregory's judgments had fallen short. The results were made public, sparking another wave of media coverage. Activists used the findings to push for broader reforms, while Gregory's supporters pointed to his willingness to confront his shortcomings as proof of his integrity. Through it all, Gregory remained steadfast. He attended community forums, spoke at law schools, and met with advocacy groups, using his platform to push for changes within the justice system. It wasn't about repairing his image. He knew some would always see him as a symbol of the system's failings. But if his mistakes could spark meaningful change, he was willing to shoulder the criticism. One afternoon, as Gregory left a forum on judicial reform, he found Nathaniel waiting for him outside. The boy's face broke into a grin as he held up a crumpled piece of paper. "I got it," Nathaniel exclaimed, thrusting the paper into Gregory's hands. Gregory unfolded it carefully, revealing a glowing report on Claudette Colvin. The teacher's comments praised Nathaniel's thorough research and passionate delivery. "An A, huh?" Gregory said, grinning. "That's incredible." Nathaniel beamed. "You helped me. So, thanks." Gregory placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his chest swelling with pride. "I'm proud of you, Nathaniel, not just for the grade, but for the effort you put into it. You're going to do amazing things, I can feel it." Nathaniel's smile widened, and for the first time, Gregory felt like he was truly earning the title of dad. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the city, Gregory stood on the courthouse steps once more. This time he wasn't there to face scrutiny, but to join a rally advocating for judicial accountability. Nathaniel stood by his side, holding a sign that read, "Justice for All." The crowd cheered as Gregory took the microphone, his voice ringing out with newfound confidence. "We are not defined by our mistakes," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, "but by what we choose to do after them. I stand here today not as a perfect man, but as one committed to being better. For my son, for this community, for all of us." The applause was deafening, but Gregory's focus remained on Nathaniel, who looked up at him with pride. In that moment, Gregory knew they were both on a path of growth and redemption, one step at a time. The courthouse felt colder than usual, the tension in the air palpable as Gregory walked through its halls. Today's case wasn't about his career or the systemic changes he had been championing. It was about Nathaniel. A new custody battle had emerged, threatening the delicate progress Gregory had made in building a relationship with his son. Seated at the plaintiff's table was Nathaniel's distant uncle, Peter Carter, a man Gregory had only recently learned about. Peter was in his mid-40s, with a sharp suit and a sharper glare. He had filed for custody of Nathaniel, claiming that Gregory's sudden involvement in the boy's life was too disruptive, and that Lena's financial struggles made her an unfit guardian. Gregory had fought many battles in court, but never one so personal. Today, he wasn't just a judge, he was a father fighting to protect his son. The courtroom was packed. Word of the case had spread quickly, drawing media attention and community members who had followed Gregory's public reckoning. Lena sat beside Gregory at the defendant's table, her hands tightly clasped. Nathaniel, too young to fully grasp the stakes, sat quietly between them, his small frame dwarfed by the massive bench. Peter's lawyer rose to address the court, his tone confident and rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case isn't about malice. It's about ensuring the best future for a child who has already endured so much loss and instability. My client, Peter Carter, is a financially secure, family-oriented individual who has known Nathaniel his entire life. He is better equipped to provide the structure and stability this boy needs." As the lawyer continued, Gregory felt a swell of anger. Peter's argument painted a picture of Gregory and Lena as chaotic and incapable, an image Gregory knew wasn't true. He glanced at Nathaniel, who was staring down at his hands, his shoulders hunched. When it was Gregory's turn to speak, he stood, his voice steady but resolute. "Your Honor, I won't deny that mistakes have been made in the past. But this case isn't about the past, it's about Nathaniel's future. He is thriving under Lena's care. And I've worked tirelessly to establish a stable and meaningful relationship with him. Removing him from the life he knows now would do far more harm than good." Gregory's lawyer presented evidence of Nathaniel's progress since Gregory's involvement, glowing reports from teachers, testimony from Lena about their routine, and even a brief letter Nathaniel had written, expressing his desire to stay with the family he knew. It was a poignant moment, and Gregory could see the judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness, taking it all in. As the trial continued, Peter took the stand. His demeanor was polished, but Gregory saw through the facade. Peter spoke about his financial stability and his deep love for Nathaniel, but his words felt hollow. Gregory suspected Peter's motives weren't entirely pure. There was an air of resentment, a need to assert control. Gregory's lawyer seized on this during cross-examination. "Mr. Carter, you've lived out of state for most of Nathaniel's life, correct?" "Yes," Peter admitted, his voice clipped. "But that doesn't mean I haven't cared about him." "Of course. But it does mean you've had limited involvement in his upbringing. Isn't it true that until recently you hadn't seen Nathaniel in over 3 years?" Peter's jaw tightened. "I didn't think it was necessary. Lena seemed to have things under control. And yet now you believe she's unfit." Peter hesitated, clearly frustrated by the line of questioning. Gregory felt a flicker of hope. His lawyer was dismantling Peter's credibility piece by piece. Lena took the stand next, her testimony raw and heartfelt. She spoke about raising Nathaniel after Mia's death, the challenges they had faced together, and the joy Gregory had brought into Nathaniel's life. Her voice trembled at times, but her words were undeniably powerful. "I've done everything I can to give Nathaniel a stable and loving home," she said. "And since Judge Harrison Gregory entered his life, I've seen a side of Nathaniel I hadn't seen in years. He's happier, more confident. Taking that away from him would be a mistake." When it was Gregory's turn, he felt the weight of the room's scrutiny. He wasn't just speaking as a lawyer or a judge, he was speaking as a father. "Your Honor," Gregory began, his voice steady, "I've spent my entire career fighting for justice and fairness, but when it came to my own life, I failed. I let fear dictate my actions, and I missed years I'll never get back with my son." He paused, glancing at Nathaniel, who was watching him intently. "But I'm here now. I've made mistakes, but I'm committed to doing better for Nathaniel. He deserves to grow up surrounded by people who love him, who understand him, and who will fight for him. That's what I'm doing here today." The courtroom fell silent as Gregory stepped down. The judge called for a brief recess, giving everyone time to process the arguments. Gregory returned to the defendant's table, his nerves frayed. Lena gave him a reassuring nod, and Nathaniel leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did good." Gregory's chest tightened at the boy's words. "Thanks, kiddo." When the judge returned, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. She addressed the courtroom with measured authority. "This case has been challenging, to say the least. It's clear that everyone involved cares deeply about Nathaniel's well-being. However, the court's responsibility is to prioritize what is in the child's best interest." Gregory held his breath as the judge continued. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it is my judgment that Nathaniel remain in the care of Lena Carter, with continued and expanded visitation rights for Judge Harrison." A collective exhale swept through the room. Gregory felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. Nathaniel beamed, throwing his arms around Lena, who hugged him tightly. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I encourage all parties to work together to provide a supportive and nurturing environment for Nathaniel. This is not just about one individual, it's about building a family." Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was jubilant. Reporters swarmed Gregory, but he ignored their questions, focusing solely on Nathaniel. The boy looked up at him with a grin so wide it made Gregory's heart ache. "We won?" Nathaniel asked, his voice filled with wonder. "We won," Gregory confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "But this isn't just about winning, Nathaniel. It's about making sure you have the best life possible." Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're going to stick around, right?" Gregory knelt down, looking the boy square in the eye. "I'm not going anywhere. That's a promise." That evening, back at Lena's apartment, the family celebrated with takeout and laughter. For the first time in years, Gregory felt a profound sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to savor the victory. As Nathaniel drifted off to sleep on the couch, his head resting on Gregory's shoulder, Lena leaned over with a smile. "You did good today." Gregory chuckled softly. "We all did." And for the first time, Gregory truly believed it. Together they had fought for Nathaniel, and together they would build something stronger, something lasting. The summer sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows over the courthouse steps as Gregory Harrison stood there, his son Nathaniel by his side. It had been months since the custody case was resolved, and the dust was finally beginning to settle. The crowd gathered today wasn't full of protesters or reporters, but of community members, activists, and advocates for change. They had come to hear Gregory speak about the reforms he had spent months championing, reforms inspired by the journey that had brought Nathaniel into his life. As the microphone was adjusted, Gregory's gaze fell on Nathaniel. The boy gave him a small, encouraging smile, his eyes gleaming with pride. That smile carried Gregory through the speech he was about to deliver. "Good evening," Gregory began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I stand here today not as a judge, but as a man who has learned more in the past year than in decades on the bench. I've learned that justice isn't just about rulings and laws, it's about people. It's about the lives we touch and the legacies we leave behind." The crowd hushed, their attention fixed on him. "When my son Nathaniel walked into my courtroom and into my life, he brought with him questions I didn't have answers for. Questions about my past, my decisions, and the ways I had failed to live up to the ideals I claimed to uphold. But he also brought me hope, a chance to change, to grow, and to make amends." Gregory glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded slightly, as if urging him to continue. "I won't pretend that this has been an easy journey. I've faced scrutiny, self-doubt, and moments where I wasn't sure if I could rise to the challenge. But through it all, I've held on to one truth: it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to fight for what truly matters." The crowd erupted into applause, and Gregory paused, allowing the moment to settle before continuing. "That's why I've committed to reviewing cases impacted by bias, including my own. It's why I've partnered with local organizations to create mentorship programs for at-risk youth, to ensure that children like Nathaniel have the support and opportunities they deserve. And it's why I've worked with my colleagues to push for systemic reforms that address the inequities that have plagued our justice system for far too long." As Gregory spoke, he thought back to the challenges he had faced. The sleepless nights spent poring over old cases, the difficult conversations with colleagues who resisted change, and the moments of doubt when he questioned if his efforts would make any difference. But he also thought of the victories the cases reopened and corrected, the young people mentored, and the lives touched by the changes he had helped implement. He thought of Nathaniel, who had given him the courage to confront his flaws and the inspiration to strive for something better. And while systemic change is critical, Gregory continued, it starts with us as individuals. It starts with being willing to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we doing enough? Are we standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves? Are we living lives that reflect the values we claim to hold dear? Another round of applause broke out, this one louder, more enthusiastic. Gregory felt a swell of gratitude for the people who had supported him, who had stood by him as he fought to become a better man. After the speech, Gregory stepped away from the podium to mingle with the crowd. Nathaniel stayed close, holding his father's hand as people approached to shake Gregory's hand or share their appreciation. Many asked to meet Nathaniel, and the boy smiled shyly, his confidence growing with each interaction. "You've got a good dad there," one man said, ruffling Nathaniel's hair. "Yeah," Nathaniel replied, glancing up at Gregory with a grin. "I think so too." As the crowd began to disperse, Lena approached, her face glowing with pride. "You nailed it," she said, pulling Gregory into a brief hug. That was exactly what people needed to hear. Thanks, Gregory said, his voice soft. I couldn't have done it without you. Lena waved him off. You're the one who did the work. I just made sure you didn't chicken out. Gregory laughed, the sound light and genuine. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years, of peace that came from knowing he was finally living a life of purpose. Later that evening, Gregory, Nathaniel, and Lena returned to her apartment for a quiet celebration. Nathaniel sprawled on the couch, flipping through a book about space exploration, a gift from Gregory after their visit to the Science Museum. You really like that one, huh? Gregory asked, settling into the armchair across from him. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes never leaving the page. It's cool. I'm going to be an astronaut someday. I don't doubt it, Gregory said with a smile. And when you do, I'll be the first in line to cheer you on. Nathaniel glanced up, his expression thoughtful. You think I can really do it? I know you can, Gregory said firmly. You've got everything you need: brains, determination, and a family that believes in you. Nathaniel smiled, his confidence bolstered by Gregory's words. As the evening wound down, Gregory found himself alone on the balcony, gazing out at the city skyline. The weight of the past year settled over him, not as a burden, but as a reminder of how far he had come. He thought of Mia, her letters, and the quiet strength she had shown in raising Nathaniel alone. He hoped she would be proud of the man he was becoming. Dad, Nathaniel's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Gregory turned to find the boy standing in the doorway, his small frame illuminated by the warm glow of the apartment. What's up, kiddo? Nathaniel hesitated, then stepped onto the balcony. I just wanted to say, thanks for everything. Gregory knelt down, placing his hands on Nathaniel's shoulders. You don't have to thank me. You've given me more than I could ever give you. Nathaniel frowned, confused. What do you mean? Gregory smiled, his voice thick with emotion. You've taught me what it means to be brave, to fight for what matters. You've made me want to be a better man. Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears, and he threw his arms around Gregory's neck. Gregory hugged him tightly, the bond between them stronger than ever. As they returned inside, Gregory felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, changes to make, and a son to raise, but for the first time he felt ready to face it all, knowing he wasn't alone. For Nathaniel, for Mia, and for the future they were building together, Gregory was determined to keep moving forward. And this time he wouldn't let fear hold him back.